Hello, I'm Dan Ramirez, this is Satij Shah, and this is Leon Hakimi.
And we want to welcome you to One Step to a Five.
Okay, so the first topic we're going to cover today is Congress versus Parliament.
Let's begin by Parliament. So in order to become a member of Parliament, the candidate must persuade the party to put their name on the ballot. Voters have to choose for a party, not a candidate. Once in Parliament, you choose for the Prime Minister, unlike the US. Also, compared to Congress, Parliament has very little power and less staff members.
Okay, so now for Congress. So congressional candidates, they run in a primary election with little party control over the nomination. And the result is a body of independent representatives of districts and states. And the members do not choose the chief executive. Also, the principal work of members is representation and action. So they have a great deal of power and a lot of pay. Alright, so next we're going to have Daniel tell us about the intent of the framers.
So the intent of the framers was to balance large and small states, which was basically bicameralism. Congress was supposed to be the dominant institution.
And there were two competing values in the evolution. You had centralization and also decentralization. Centralization was a quick acting Congress with strong central leadership and little interference.
Then we have decentralization, which is the protection of individual members and constituencies with weak power.
And the general trend over the years has been towards decentralization, especially since the mid-19th to 20th century.
So Leon, what about incumbency?
Well, since the 1950s, membership of Congress has become a career. Incumbents have great electoral advantage. This is so because they have more media coverage and greater name recognition. Now let's talk about party.
Alright, so Congress has become more partisan and polarized, and since the 1990s, important pieces of legislation have often passed along party lines.
So there are three views on representation. The first one is representational view, which is where members vote to please their constituents in order to secure re-election. It's most common when constituents have a clear view and the legislative vote is likely to attract attention, and it's more likely to vote in accord with constituents when pertaining to civil rights and social welfare, but less on foreign policy.
Next, we have the organizational view. When constituency interests are not vitally at stake, members primarily respond to cues from colleagues. Party and ideological ties cause each member to look to specific members for guidance.
And finally, we have the attitudinal view, where the member's ideology determines his or her vote. House members are ideologically more similar to the average voter than our senators, more likely to challenge, investigate, or denounce each other, and also less likely to negotiate over legislation or reach compromise settlements. Alright, now let's go over the party organization of the Senate.
The President pro tempore presides the Senate. This is the member with the most seniority in the majority party. Leaders are the majority leader and the minority leader, elected by the respective party members.
Alright, and the majority leader schedules Senate business, usually in consultation with the minority leader. And the majority leader is usually skilled at political bargaining and can acquire substantial influence over the substance of Senate business.
So party whips keep leaders informed, round up votes, and count noses. Each party has a policy committee which schedules Senate business and sets priorities for bills.
Now let's talk about the party structure in the House of Representatives.
So House rules give leadership more power. The Speaker of the House is the leader of the majority party and presides over the House.
He or she decides who to recognize to speak on the floor. They assign bills to committees subject to some rules. They influence which bills are brought up for a vote. They appoint members of special and select committees, and they also have some informal powers.
So majority leader and minority leaders are leaders on the floor. Committee assignments and legislative schedules are set by each party. Senate contrasts with the House. Senate has changed through changes in norms rather than change in rules. Senate now less party-centered and less leader-oriented, more hospital refreshment, more heavily staffed, and more subcommittee-oriented.
Now let's talk about committees. Legislative committees are the most important organizational feature of Congress. They're responsible for considering bills or legislative proposals, maintaining oversight over executive agencies, and conducting investigations.
Now there are four types of committees. Standing committees are basically permanent bodies with specified legislative responsibilities. Select committees, groups appointed for a limited purpose and limited duration. Joint committees, those on which both representatives and senators serve, and conference committees, a joint committee appointed to resolve differences in Senate and House versions of the same piece of legislation before final passage.
Now let's go over committee practices. So majority party has a majority of seats on the committee and they name the chair. House members usually serve on two standing committees or one exclusive committee, and senators serve on two major committees and one minor committee. Usually the most senior member of the committee is elected by the majority party.
Certain committees tend to attract particular types of legislators. Policy-oriented members are attracted to finance or foreign policy committees. Constituency-oriented members are attracted to small business or veteran affairs committees.
Next up, we have how a bill becomes a law. So bills travel through Congress at varying speeds. Bills to spend money or to tax or regulate businesses move very slowly. Bills with a clear, appealing idea move fast, especially if they do not require large expenditures. Complexity of the legislative process helps the bill's opponents.
Alright, now introducing a bill. So a bill must be introduced by a member of Congress. Public bills generally pertain to public affairs. Private bills pertain to a particular individual, and they're pretty rare nowadays, and they're usually delegated to administrative agencies or courts. Pending legislation does not carry over from one Congress to another. It must be reintroduced. Congress initiates most legislation.
So resolutions. A simple resolution is passed by one house and affects that house, but is not signed by the president and does not have the force of law. A concurrent resolution is passed by both houses and affects both houses and not signed by the president and does not have the force of law. A joint resolution is essentially a law passed by both houses and signed by the president. If used to propose constitutional amendment, 2/3 vote is required in both houses, but the president's signature is not necessary. So let's talk about more information about bills and committees. A bill is referred to a committee for consideration by either Speaker or presiding officer of the Senate. Chamber rules define each committee's jurisdiction, but sometimes the Speaker has to make a choice. Speaker's decision can be appealed to the full House. Revenue bills must originate in the House. Most bills die in committee. After hearings and markup sessions, the committees report a bill onto the full House or Senate.
A bill must be placed on a calendar to come for a veto before either house. The House Rules Committee sets up the rules for consideration. There's three major rules. You have closed rule, which sets time limit on debate and restricts amendments. There's the open rule, which permits amendments from the floor. And there's the restrictive rule, which permits only some amendments.
So now can you two please talk about floor debates?
Well, in the House, we have the Committee of the Whole. This is a procedural device for expediting House consideration of bills, although it cannot pass bills. Committee sponsor of a bill organizes the discussion. No additional provisions are allowed. The House usually passes the sponsoring committee's version of the bill.
For floor debates in the Senate, additional provisions to a bill are actually quite common, and committee hearing processes can be bypassed by a Senate with a rider, or if a bill has already passed in-house. Debate can be limited only by a cloture vote. 3/5 of the Senate must vote in favor of ending the filibuster, and both filibusters and successful cloture votes are becoming more and more common. It is easier now to stop filibusters, and roll calls can be replaced by long speeches, and filibusters can be curtailed by double tracking, where a bill is basically shelved away temporarily, so the Senate can continue other business. Effectively, neither party controls the Senate unless it has at least 60 votes. Otherwise, the Senate must act as a bipartisan majority.
Wait, so what about voting?
To investigate voting behavior, one must know how a legislator voted on key amendments as well as on the bill itself. The procedures for voting in the House are voice vote, division vote, which is standing vote, a teller vote, and a roll call vote, which is now electronic.
Senate voting is the same, except there is no teller vote and there are no electronic counters. Now the differences in Senate and House versions of a bill. If there are minor differences, then the last House to act merely sends the bill to the other House, which accepts the changes. If there are major differences, a conference committee must be appointed. Decisions are approved by a majority of each delegation, and the conference report often slightly favors the Senate version of the bill, and the conference report is then sent back to each House. And the report can only be accepted or rejected, not amended. If the report is accepted, usually, as the alternate is often to have no bill.
The bill, in its final form, goes to the President. The President can then sign the bill or veto it. In order to override a veto, both Congresses must support the bill with a 2/3 majority.
Hey guys, we're back. We have to freshen up, really quick, change our clothes, freshen up our minds.
Now let's talk about the reformation of Congress.
So, franking, which is the ability of Congress members to mail letters to constituents for free, is becoming increasingly regulated. Congress has become more accountable for the law. Through the Congressional Accountability Act of 1995, Congress obliged itself to obey 11 major employment laws. It also created an independent Office of Compliance to deal with implementation, avoiding excessive executive power over Congress.
And then we also have something called pork barrel legislation. This is legislation that gives tangible benefits to constituents in return for votes, which has been trimmed over the years. This includes bills containing money to provide for local projects such as bridges, dams, and so on. The goal is to reduce misallocation of tax dollars for trivial benefits. However, the main cause of this deficit is entitlement programs, not pork. Most categories of pork have had decreased funding in the past 10 to 15 years. Identifying pork is a judgment call, as some district funding is necessary. Pork facilitates compromise among members, who are also supposed to be district advocates.
So let's talk about post-September 11 Congress. So a common criticism was Congress cannot act quickly or change to meet new challenges.
And then now let's go over Congress and terrorism. So the 9/11 Commission recommended fundamental changes in oversight of intelligence gathering and counterterrorism activities. Congress has been reluctant to pass legislation implementing the Commission's recommendations. Reorganization is likely to take years.
Here we have a list of some powers of Congress. It's important to note that these powers can be found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Here we have another visual which compares the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Alright, thank you guys for joining us to One Step 205. Hope you guys had a good time. Peace.